Good morning. I want to welcome you all back. I hope you had a really restful, wonderful, well-deserved break. I want to welcome back especially the rookies up there. How you guys doing? You know, you're halfway through your rookie season, so you're not new anymore. Before you know, you'll be down here. And you'll be our leader, so I want you to listen especially closely to what I have to say today. Because I want to, as we begin, this is a really fitting place to begin the new year, a morning meeting. And I want to speak to you this morning about something called right speech. And I want to look at it through the lens of a couple of different religious traditions. And so I'll start with the Buddhist tradition. In Buddhism, right speech is abstaining from lying, from divisive speech, from abusive speech, from idle chatter. Not easy for any of us to do, is it? Really, when you think about it. When you look around the media, TV, internet, magazines, you look at this current political campaign, even some of your music, and some of the music that I listened to growing up, you listen to the language. It's not easy for us, no matter how honest and virtuous we think we are. But just as we'll never reach the North Star, the reason the Earth's axis is pointed towards the North Star, so the North Star seems like it's fixed in the sky. So if you're lost in the woods, you use the North Star to guide you out to civilization. You never reach it. The same way, we could use the Buddhist teaching on right speech to guide us when we get lost in unwholesome patterns of speaking. Now, you and I can hardly rule the world. We can't control everything that goes on, right? It's hard enough to get out of bed in the morning sometimes, right? Comb your hair and get to class on time. But we can't make much of it, big impact, but we can make some on things like accidents and diseases, racism, inequality, homophobia, and all these things. But how we live our lives day to day, especially in the context of a community, like particularly a boarding community like Taft, does matter because we impact the lives of one another and others impact our lives in significant ways. So how we speak to one another matters. A careless word can trigger a chain reaction of destruction throughout a community. But conversely, a true and loving word can send a tidal wave of compassion into the world. So right speech is of paramount importance. The old adage, those of you who grew up in the Western world or America know the children's adage, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. It's complete hogwash. Not true at all. We should never teach our children something like that. Let me illustrate this with you, a spiritual story. There was an old Buddhist master. He sat before like this, an assembly of yogis. And he said, "Tonight I'm going to speak to you about wise speech. According to the Buddha, wise speech is thoughtful, it's gentle, it's helpful, it's spoken with a kind heart, and it is timely." Then the master spoke at great length about the harm that can come from words that are mean, that are cruel, that are thoughtless, that are careless. Well, a young yogi stood up, he raised his hand and said, "Venerable sir, I do not understand how this can be. A stone can bruise, theft can deprive, brawling can cause bleeding, but words are mere sounds. They have no substance, so I must disagree with you and suggest that they are not so powerful." Well, the old master, he was silent. He looked down on the yogis. He looked at the young man. He stroked his beard. Then he raised his voice and he said, "Well, if you weren't such an idiot, you would understand. So why don't you sit down right now and shut up and stop interrupting me with your ignorant talk. You are a useless, incompetent fool who will never amount to anything in your little, pathetic, pitiful life." Wow, that's pretty harsh, huh? I added a little bit in there. Well, what happened? Everyone's like looking at each other, all the yogis, and this heavy silence went over the room, and then suddenly the young yogi dropped to his cushion. And then the master went on calmly with his Dharma talk. 50 minutes later, the young yogi jumped to his feet without raising his arms and yelled, "You are a fraud. You cannot possibly be the great teacher you pretend to be." His face was red, his eyes were bulging, and tears were coming down his cheeks. He's trembling, he's shaking, he's filled with anger, he can barely control himself. It's like after you get like a 62 on a test, right? But the old master turned to the yogi and he said, You seem perturbed. Your gentle disposition is shattered. What happened to you? Haven't you been practicing meditation?" Well, the young yogi, still trembling and shaking, said, "You hurl insults at me I did not deserve. No man If wisdom should speak so harshly, you are a fraud. Well, the venerable master, he paused again, stroked his beard, and then he calmly said, "Oh, I see. It was my words that had such a transforming effect upon you. It seems you have changed your philosophy. It seems that you and I agree that speech is quite powerful." Well, the young yogi's face went blank. His angry flush subsided. A shy smile formed at the corners of his mouth, and he bowed slightly to the master. He said, "You truly are a venerable, wise teacher. I shall never forget this lesson. Speech can be very powerful." Well, yes, speech is very powerful, and we need to communicate, be wise in the way we communicate. We want to be mindful. It'd be interesting for you in the next few days and weeks to observe the way we speak to one another here, the way you speak to each other as roommates, as classmates, as teammates, just around the campus. Observe how we interact as faculty with students, faculty to faculty, faculty and students to staff. And observe what goes on in the world around you, in the media and TV, how people speak to one another. See, the language of the heart always finds the way to connect and uplift. And I think one of the problems in Western education, and now it's being imported to the whole world, is it's always been from here up. It's always been the intellect. But the intellect that's not connected to the heart is dangerous. So language of the heart always uplifts. So in communication, you must pay attention to who you are attempting to speak to. It's about the other. It's not just about yourself. We don't want to live in a solipsistic world, do we? You know that word, solipsism? I don't want to go into Wittgenstein's philosophy here, but in a common definition, solipsism is you think you're the only real thing in the universe. You think you're the only one that has a valid and meaningful life. You think the only one that has meaningful thoughts and experiences. It's all about you. It's all about your pain, your joy, your suffering, your pleasures. It's hardly a component for having empathy and compassion and understanding and caring about others. It's the very definition of egocentrism. And when your world revolves only around you, or me, or whoever, your actions will never be destructive to the health of any community. So the Buddha's teachings on right speech relate to another teaching. It comes to us from the Sufi tradition. The Sufis are the Islamic mystics. Islam, a much maligned religion, particularly in America today, due to lack of education and ignorance about this great religion. But you've probably seen the Sufis, the whirling dervishes. They have a conical camel's hair cap on, and that symbolizes the tombstone of the ego. And then they have a white skirt, and as they spin around, it billows out, and that skirt encases the ego. And the idea of spinning also is symbolic of the way the planets in our solar system orbit around the sun. But as they spin around, they abandon ego. And they abandon worldly desires, and the idea is so they can have a profound experience of God. So the Sufis have a test for us. They have 3 gates, 3 golden gates. And before you speak, your words must come through these gates. And the first one is what you're going to say true? Next one is what you're going to say necessary, because it's not always necessary to say something, even though it might be true. Sometimes we say things, we embarrass friends, we bring up old stories. Maybe they happen, but is it necessary to say that? Do you want to humiliate someone? And the third one is the most important. Is it kind? And I love the way, I think Buddhism in general, and the Dalai Lama says, my religion is a religion of kindness. More contemporary Sufi traditions, they add a 4th gate. Is it true? Is it necessary? And then, is it beneficial, what you're going to say? And then, of course, is it kind? And if it can't pass through these gates, don't say it. You know, if you were to, somebody asked me, sum up the Bible, Jewish, Christian scriptures all together in one verse, I would do it. And I would say, I'd go back to the 28th, Micah, who was a prophet 2,800 years ago, a Jewish prophet. He said this, what does the Lord require of you? Simple. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. That's the essence of the whole Bible. If that's all you know, that'd be sufficient. Luminaries from the great, from Gandhi to our wonderful First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, they had their own version of this, the 3 golden gates. And even Socrates, 2,400 years ago, said he had a triple filter test. He said, if it's true, if it's good, if it's useful, you may speak. Otherwise, remain silent. So right speech is central to both Buddhist morality and all of the moral systems of the world's major religious traditions. What is it? It's basically abstinence from gossip, from slander, from lying, from maliciousness, from hate speech. We have too much of that today. So to speak wisely or rightly is to do so truthfully with kindness, purpose, and meaning. Now there's a Pali term. Pali is the language that the Buddha spoke. It's a sacred language of Buddhism. The original texts, Southeast Asia and Theravada Buddhism, were written in Pali. There's a Pali term called samavaka. And samavaka means, translated as right speech, but scholars say a more accurate translation of samavaka is wise and skillful speech. Buddhist morality is based on another Pali term called samadhana, now, which is best translated as harmony, coordination, generosity. So samavaka is speech that promotes harmony. And it's important to note there's a distinction here. Buddhist morality is different from what we often see in the dualism of Western ethics. That is both in theistic and non-theistic, or God-centered or secular. It doesn't matter. We have a dualism in our Western way of thinking. It's not simply about right or wrong. We always get in this dichotomy, right or wrong, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. What it's actually about is harmonizing, bringing all things together. This is the meaning. Those of you who know Taoism, the symbol, the yin-yang symbol. And it's about bringing the pairs of opposites in the world together, light and dark, masculine and feminine, good and evil, finding a harmony, because all things are interrelated. You see that in the little yin-yang symbol. You've got the dark swirl with the white dot and the white swirl with the black dot. That good and evil, masculine and feminine, light, dark, it's all interrelated. It's part of one whole package. It's not us and them. So right speech is also always accompanied by something called deep listening. Anybody, I was in, one of the things I like to do, I was in the city visiting a museum and looking at a display of Buddhist statues. I like to spend my time. And you notice if you go into a Buddhist monastery or a museum, the Buddhists have these long earlobes. One of it's symbolically to illustrate that the Buddha came from great wealth. And the way to display your wealth back then was to wear these gaudy, big, expensive earrings, and they would weigh your earlobes down. But another way it symbolizes the wealth that he had, a different kind of wealth, a wisdom, knowledge, compassion. And the third symbolism of those long ears is that he was able to deeply listen to the pains and sufferings of others in the world and come to their aid. So deep listening, if we can't listen deeply to one another, we can't understand one another. And we need to do this not at the level of the intellect, but at the level of the heart. So what we need to do is go inside ourselves. Be aware of what's going on inside us when we're engaging with another person and speaking with them. And be mindfully present and think to ourselves, is what I'm saying right now being spoken at the right time? Is it spoken in truth? Is it spoken affectionately? Is it spoken beneficially? And is it spoken with a mind of loving kindness? Now, there are many passages, since I'm a Christian minister, in the Jewish and Christian scriptures that refer to right speech. There's one of my favorite books is at the very end of the Bible, written by James. Tradition says it was written by Jesus' brother, who was a really powerful person in early Christianity. And James writes, he teaches us that how a person should use their mouth. It says, with your mouth we bless God, and with it we curse those who are made in the image of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. Should a spring have both pure water, or can a spring have both pure water and bitter water? So whether it's in the Sufi, Islamic tradition, Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Zoroastrian, Sikh, all the ancient great religions, and even the contemporary ones like Baha'i, they all say similar things in their sacred scriptures about how we should treat one another. They all teach that wrong speech is very damaging. So how we communicate with one another is important. We may not have control over what goes on in the world around us, but what we say and do, particularly right here, we're all together, we're in this academic monastery together, right, has an impact on everyone around us. As the old saying goes, if you don't have anything good to say, don't say anything at all. Shakespeare said, "He that filches from me my good name robs me of that which not enriches him and makes me poor indeed." I'll let you Shakespearean scholars figure out what filches means. Now everyone says the wrong thing at some point or another, As a minister and teacher for over 35 years, God, I can't believe I'm this old, quite a bit. I have to speak to all kinds of people quite a bit. And I never wanted to do this, really. I was always an introvert by nature. But my profession and calling have led me into this world, as a public speaker. And I can't count the number of times I've used unskillful speech. Most of the time, unintentionally. And I wanted to think I was saying something useful, but it didn't come out the right way. Have you ever done that? I'm sure you've done that, right? But at other times, I have to admit, my heart, my intentions weren't in the right place when I spoke, out of anger, whatever. Subsequently, I was not mindful of the 3 or the 4 golden gates of the Sufi, and I caused hurt. In those unfortunate times when I realized that I said something hurtful, I certainly regretted it. And even if I offered an apology, I knew that it was too late, that the hurt was done. Here's another spiritual story. It comes from the Hasidic Jewish tradition. There was once a woman. I talked about a young yogi man, so I'm talking about a woman here. It could be a man or a woman. There was once a young woman who said many terrible things about others in the temple for years. One day she realized how bad she felt about hurting so many people with her destructive words, so she went to her rabbi. She asked him, "What can I do to make amends?" The rabbi told her to come back the next day with a box. He gave her a box. He said, "Come back the next day with this box filled with feathers. And then when you enter the temple, I want you to place these feathers along the walkway." No, she was excited. She had a chance to make amends, change her life. She comes back with the box of feathers. She lines the walkway with them, and then she goes into the office to meet with the rabbi. After they had their counseling session, things went well. He said, "There's one more thing I want you to do. Take your box back, go out to the walkway, and pick up the feathers and bring them to me." Well, she was excited. Things are changing in her life. She goes out, opens the temple doors, and she sees the feathers have all disappeared. They've all blown away in the wind. So she's very despondent, and she told the rabbi, and he turned to her and said, "This is what happens. You speak ill of others. We can't retrieve our words. They blow away like the wind. They have a rippling effect that goes out into the world. We can never get them back." So let's do this. I'm going to add a 5th gate to the Sufi teaching. And I'm going to use the acronym THINK, because you're think here, right? You got to think at Taft, don't you? You got to think in college. So the word THINK's going to come up. You're going to hear that word, you'll see it in print, and then you'll think of this acronym. And here it is. Think. Is what you're going to say true? T. Is what you're going to say helpful? H. Is what you're going to say inspiring? I. Is what you're going to say necessary? Because again, not everything's necessary. Yes, has to be said. And then the last one, the most important, is what you're going to say kind. So think. Think. As a minister and a teacher of religion, I need to be very careful with my choice of words. Sometimes my speech, as I said, is not so skillful. And there are warnings about this in the Bible, in the book of James. And this is a warning for teachers here too. He points out that preaching and teaching are dangerous professions, and any misuses of the tongue by a teacher will be judged with extra strictness. He also says that the tongue is a fire, and even a small spark, a tiny hint of a flame, can burn down a whole forest. So I need to be careful. You need to be careful. We all need to speak our truth in love, but we need to do it mindfully. We should never be timid about standing up for what is right. Sometimes we have to do that. Sometimes the wrong thing is not to stand up. But we need to think it through how we want to say it. So we must never underestimate the power of words. They can be weapons. They can be just as violent as a fist, as sticks, as stones, as guns, and even bombs. Words can have the power to cause the utmost damage, and all wars start with demeaning people, dehumanizing them. Harsh rhetoric leads into warfare and other problems. But that being said, the opposite is true. Words have the power to heal. A word rightly spoken can heal deep wounds, can reconcile former enemies, can save countless souls. It's amazing how a few words of kindness can lead to a tidal wave of love that can build a wonderful, a compassionate, a caring community. And that's the kind of community you and I want to continue to build here at Taft in 2016 and beyond, right? So with that, remember the acronym THINK. God bless. Happy 2016. Have a great day.